Ford Territory SZ2. The diesel and the all-wheel drive doesn't matter too much to this video. This one should apply to all of the Ford Territories. So let's have a look at that back wheel and see what's going on there. Driving down the road, did I notice it? Yes, there was some noise on if I turn left, there would be a bit of a rough noise. The wheel bearing, I couldn't find any videos on how to replace the rear wheel bearing on the Territory or the Falcon. They're a pain to get out. So on part of this video, we'll be explaining why it's probably worth taking it to the garage. So the Ford Territory and the Falcon on the back, they're both the same. Independent rear suspension, BA, FG, Falcon, and all of the Territories. The rear bearing is a pain because it's not built into the hub. Instead, it's pressed into the knuckle, the main cast iron part that everything else attaches to. That whole assembly has to come out, and then need to machine press out the old bearing and press in the new one. Not something you can do with normal hand tools. You've got the single piston brake caliper. That's all it does, is your brakes, the park brake or handbrake. There are shoes inside that run inside of the rotor that push out on here. So the handbrake is essentially completely separate. Before removing the caliper, it's a lot easier if you compress that piston, if you've got a nice big G-clamp. We don't want to push hydraulic fluid back up the hoses, take off that rubber dust cap, and it's a 10mm. And now I'm just compressing that piston. There's a little lip on here that often stops it sliding on. It's a 12mm. So these 12mm bolts, these are for the slider pins. So they can rotate on here. Might need to put another spanner on there. And because we've compressed that piston, that just slides up and off. Now the hose needs to come out of this bracket here. We don't want to put any weight on this hose. We'll just rest that up there for now. Make a note of which one came off which side. The slider pin, so this caliper is a sliding caliper, right? When the piston pushes, the whole caliper moves. It's important that these pins can slide in and out nice and easy. So they should be greased. I'll pop that out. Put some new grease on before I put it back together. 15mm socket for those caliper brackets. Use the breaker bar to get them loose. With those two bolts out, that slides off. Now the rotor can actually come off. That's what we're trying to do here. This is like a brake drum for the handbrake. So you need your handbrake off. Of course, you want your wheels chopped at the front. It can be tricky to get this off without damaging your handbrake shoes. Next, we need to remove this handbrake cable and the little bracket that holds it in place. Take out this little clip here, pop that out. There's that little spring out, that little clip. And now there's more movement here. It's easier to get this cable off. To carefully ease this off, I would recommend you put some CRC on here, on each wheel nut and around here, and let that soak in, because it can also adhere to the hub itself. Right, so you've got the shoes to fight with and any corrosion. Okay, so that's off. If you've got any lip on here, that's what you're going to be fighting against. So if you're adjusting the handbrake shoes through the access hole in the rotor, you're turning this knurled nut. You can see you're just making that motion through the hole. I'd got around this car and checked all of the bearings. They seemed fine. It wasn't until I got the rotor off that I noticed there was a lot of play here. Now I can feel the play in that wheel bearing. These shoes and the caliper, those support the hub. Now to remove that big hub nut, you'll need a 35mm deep impact socket. It needs to be deep to clear this shaft. If you don't have a big rattle gun to take that one off, trick is to pop the center cat out of the wheel, put the wheel in place, drop the car into the ground, so the full weight of the car is holding this in place. Put your handbrake on, you're going to put this in here, through the wheel and undo it with the wheel in place with your big long breaker bar and a pipe. The wheel speed sensor is held in by an 8mm. Now this is your control arm or your control blade. 3 bolts attach it to the knuckle. Before we loosen those, we need to take the tension off this. And we do that by jacking up the knuckle from the lower control arm. And I'm jacking it up enough to get that drive shaft, that output shaft, horizontal. We'll just tie that caliper up a little bit higher out of the way. Keep it safe from these arms going up and down. Held in by 15mm bolt. Just be careful with your wheel speed sensor while you're doing that. With the control arm out of the way, we can lower that down again before we remove the other bolts. Shock absorber first. And then a rear lower control arm. So with those 3 nuts out of the way, then you can take the bolts out. Again, starting with the upper control arm. And lastly, the lower control arm. You want to support this, you don't want this hanging down low, putting force on the inboard CV joint. Put that up there so it's supported and horizontal. This is the knuckle, this is the hub. The hub needs to come out and then the bearing gets pressed. There's a special tool that is meant to go in here, these 3 holes, to support this while you're pressing the hub out of the knuckle. I don't have that special tool. If you do want to make your own tool, a few measurements. So that's the maximum size. This one's partly obstructed, so yeah, something less. You need something less than 15mm diameter to go in those holes. They're about 110mm apart to the long one and about 7cm across there. We'll clean this up and then check our sizes to make sure we've got the right size bearing before I take it out of the package. Clean this up so we can see what we're doing. That's all cleaned up now. Take some measurements. That should help you guys in terms of making sure you get the right parts. Also, if you're pressing this out, you'll need the right size accessories to actually press this out regardless. So this inner one is the hub itself. You want something about 42mm. And the bearing that I've picked up here from ABD Group, they're AB 2020. It comes with the bearing, a replacement nuts, spring clamp. Some kits come with a replacement hub as well. We'll just make sure we've got the right bearing kit here before I take it out of the bag. That one is, it's a 42 is the inside diameter. Yep, and that's about 42. It has a radius edge on the inside, which this one does too. The outside diameter, about 78mm. Yep, 78 looks about right. I can't check the thickness because the hub's in place, but I'm happy taking that to the shop, and I will be taking it to a machine shop to get the new bearing pressed in. Before reinstalling, give these splines a clean and these threads. It has to go up to a high torque. You want that torque accurate. You don't want dirt or grease in there. Now there is a certain order the manual recommends for installation. Spline first. Okay, spline on, hub nut on. This kit did come with a replacement hub nuts, but the thread is the wrong size, so don't want to check that out. Make sure you don't go zapping on the wrong size bolt. So it says do the fronts, lower control arm first. Put the nut straight onto just to hold things in place. Upper control arm. Doesn't go on as easy as it comes off. With the bracket facing to the back. The rear lower control arm. Do not torque up the control arm bolts. Those are done with the vehicle lowered on the ground on the wheel, so that you're not twisting those bushes. Now what I've done is handbrake attachments next before the shock absorber, because that thing's in the way. So I found it easiest to attach the handbrake cable first, then put the bracket on, attach the bracket with these two 10mm bolts, the little spring clip, don't forget that one. Then I'll attach the shock absorber next. Now you want to get that lined up just right before you start forcing a bolt in there. So get that jack under the arm and prop it up till it all lines up. Next one is putting the control arm or blade on. Now you've got 3 bolts to line up. Careful you don't destroy your wheel speed sensor. It's important to have that jack in place, holding everything horizontal. That'll get you most of the way there, but not all of it. You'll also need a little bit of twisting that way, able to get those lined up and in. I'll torque these up to 88 Newton meters. The wheel speed sensor goes in there. Now it is critical you get that nut torqued up to the right specification. In this case, 325 Newton meters. Disc rotor on. Get some brake cleaner and get rid of any oil or grease off your brake shoes and that disc. Now we don't want to damage this, so we're going to nice and slowly put this on there. The workshop manual claims there's a mark on the side of the disc that lines up with the mark on the side of the hub. No such marks on mine. They must have worn off. Presumably that's to do with balance. Now don't force this one. Next is putting the brake caliper back on. I've given these slide pins a grease. And those caliper bracket bolts get torqued to 103 Newton meters. Then those brake pads go on. And the brake caliper can go back on. Those little ones get torqued up to 37 Newton meters. They're 12mm. In the workshop manual, put the tyre back on, lower the car onto the ground. You want it at resting height when you torque up those control arm joints so that the rubber's not all bound up. Problem is I can't get a torque wrench into some of these bolts with the tyre in place. You can see I've jacked up the under the lower control arm there to get it to the height. To get it to resting height, I took a measurement there, got to the same height, and I'll torque it up at that position. Front lower control arm, 126 Newton meters. Then the upper control arm, same, 126 Newton meters. And what are these? 18 on the nut and a 15 on the bolt to hold it steady. And the rear lower control arm, that is 140 Newton meters. Give it a check over, make sure you've got everything where it should be. Put that back together. It seems to be running fine, quiet around the corners. I'll be curious to see whether I see a difference in fuel economy. If you're having to go yourself, certainly a machine shop will help. But hey, if you've got a hydraulic press, welding, machining gear, etc., haven't been able to give you detailed instructions on how to press that apart, but I've left a link in the description for a video for the Ford Explorer that covers the pressing aspects. I've got a bearing from Auckland Bearings. I'll leave a link to the part numbers in the description. Presumably some of the Falcons or Territories use that smaller nut. It does not fit the SZ all-wheel drive. Actually cost me more to get a stone chip fixed in the windscreen because that had to be certified for the warrant. Crazy times. Anyway, certainly I think you get your money's worth out of taking this to a machine shop. Hope that's useful. Any tips or suggestions, please leave a comment below. That'll help other people.